She thought she had it all, a billionaire husband, a fairy tale life, and a future built on love. But one night she opened the wrong door, and found the man she trusted most in the arms of another woman. What do you do when betrayal shatters your world? For Danielle, the answer was simple: you rise. And this time, she wouldn't just survive, she would conquer. Welcome to Mr. Robert's Stories. If you love gripping tales of love, betrayal, revenge, and shocking twists, you've just found your new home. Here, every story will pull you in, make your heart race, and leave you guessing until the very last word. Now, here's the deal. Watch till the end because the best surprises are always saved for last. And if you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable story. Every story on Mr. Robert's Stories isn't just something you watch, it's something you feel, something that stays with you long after the video ends. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. Trust me, you're going to want to watch every second. This is Mr. Robert's Stories, where every story is an experience. The city skyline glittered like diamonds against the midnight sky as Danielle King's car pulled into the private drive of the luxurious penthouse she shared with her husband, Keith. For most women, returning home to such wealth and grandeur would have been a dream. But tonight, Danielle wasn't thinking about the towering glass windows or the breathtaking view from the 40th floor. Her heart was light, brimming with excitement. She had cut her business trip short, hoping to surprise Keith. 3 years into their marriage, she still believed in surprises, still believed in the magic of love despite how demanding his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals could be. In her arms, she carried a small velvet box. Inside was a watch, vintage, rare, a collector's piece Keith had admired once but never bought. She had worked quietly with a dealer to get it, imagining the look on his face when she handed it to him. As she entered the lobby, the security guard smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mrs. King. Back earlier than expected." Danielle smiled, pressing a finger to her lips. "It's a surprise." The elevator hummed softly as it carried her upward, her reflection in the mirrored walls showing a woman who looked every bit the billionaire's wife, sleek black dress, natural curls framing her beautiful face, and eyes that still sparkled with hope. But beneath that polished exterior, Danielle was more than just a wife. She was strong, ambitious, and brave. She had built her own wellness brand from scratch, even as she supported Keith's empire. Still, her heart was his. The elevator doors slid open. Quietly, she slipped her heels off, carrying them in one hand as she padded down the hallway. The penthouse was dim, only a faint glow spilling from the master bedroom. She grinned. Perfect. He's probably still awake. But the moment she pushed open the door, her world shattered. There he was, her husband, entwined with another woman in their bed. Danielle froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a heartbeat, her brain refused to process it. The champagne bottle on the nightstand. The scent of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. The soft laughter, sharp, cruel, that sliced through the silence. Her hands trembled so violently that the velvet box slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor with a dull thud. Keith's head jerked up, his blue eyes widening in shock. "Danielle." The woman beside him smirked, unashamed, her red lipstick smeared. Danielle recognized her instantly, Victoria, Keith's glamorous assistant. She had always been too close, always smiling a little too sweetly during business dinners. But Danielle, foolishly trusting, had dismissed her instincts. Now the truth burned like acid in her chest. Danielle's voice was barely above a whisper. "How could you?" Keith pushed off the bed, grabbing his robe. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't you dare," Danielle snapped, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare insult me with that lie." Victoria chuckled, stretching lazily as if she belonged there. "Maybe if you weren't so busy playing entrepreneur, you'd notice what your husband really needs." Danielle's cheeks burned hot with humiliation, but she lifted her chin. "You can keep your insults. Both of you." Keith ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing across his face. "Danielle, listen. You'll never understand. You're different. Too independent, too busy, too stubborn. A man like me, He stopped himself, but the words had already cut deep. Her heart clenched. "A man like you?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "A man like you doesn't deserve a woman like me." For a long, breathless moment, they just stared at each other. Keith, the man she had given her heart to, stood there silent. He didn't fight for her. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He just let her go with his silence. That was when Danielle understood. The love she had clung to was gone, shattered by betrayal. She bent down, picked up the velvet box, and placed it on the dresser. "This was supposed to be a gift for you," she said softly. "But now, it's just a reminder of how blind I've been." Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not in front of her. Danielle straightened her shoulders, slipping her heels back on with quiet grace. Her every movement screamed dignity, even though her soul felt torn apart. At the door, she paused, her back to them. "You may have broken my heart, Keith, but you will never break me." And with that, she walked out. The night air hit her like ice as she stepped outside. The city still glittered, cars still rushed by, and life went on as if her world hadn't just ended. Danielle clutched her coat tighter, her body trembling, but her spirit, though bruised, refused to crumble. She replayed his words in her head, "You'll never understand. You're too independent, too stubborn." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. He had mistaken her strength for weakness, her ambition for neglect. He had wanted someone easy to control, someone who would live in his shadow. But that wasn't Danielle. That had never been Danielle. As she walked, her mind shifted from heartbreak to resolve. She had built once before, and she could build again. She would not let betrayal define her story. Somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited, a fire born of pain but fueled by determination. Keith had cheated. He had humiliated her. But Danielle King was not a woman who stayed down. She would rise, stronger and braver than ever, and one day, he would see that the greatest mistake of his life wasn't cheating on her. It was underestimating her. The next morning, sunlight poured into the tiny apartment Danielle hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the penthouse she had left behind with Keith. No marble floors, no glass chandeliers, no silk curtains swaying in the breeze. Just a modest one-bedroom tucked above a noisy cafe, with paint peeling on the walls and the faint smell of coffee drifting in from below. Danielle dropped her suitcase on the floor and stood in the middle of the room. For a moment, silence pressed down on her, the weight of last night's betrayal crashing all over again. She could still see Keith's face, surprised, guilty, defensive. She could still hear Victoria's mocking laughter. The pain rose sharp and unrelenting, threatening to choke her. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. How could he? 3 years of love. 3 years of sacrifices, of sleepless nights supporting his empire, of smiling through social events where people whispered behind her back about being the wrong kind of woman for a billionaire. She had endured it all because she believed in him, believed in them. And in one moment, he had thrown it away for lust. A sob escaped her lips, raw and broken. But she caught it halfway, straightening, forcing herself to breathe. She would cry, yes, she was human. But she would not drown in tears. Keith had betrayed her, but she would not betray herself by staying broken. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words she had heard as a little girl. "Danielle, storms don't destroy strong trees. They only prove how deep the roots go." Danielle lifted her head. Her roots were deep. The following weeks were brutal. Her name was suddenly everywhere. Tabloids plastered headlines, "Billionaire Keith King's wife walks out after scandal." Paparazzi camped outside the cafe, snapping photos of her simple clothes and bare face. Socialites whispered cruelly, she couldn't keep him. Didn't he always look too good for her? Each headline cut like glass. Each whisper stung. But Danielle didn't hide. She walked with her head high, even when her heart ached. Instead of disappearing into shame, she poured her energy into the one thing she had left, her wellness brand, Soulrise. It had started small, a line of teas and skincare products she had designed herself, inspired by her grandmother's natural remedies. For years, it had been her side project, something she worked on while juggling her life as Keith's wife. Now it became her lifeline. She rented a tiny office space, hired 2 interns, and worked day and night. She packed boxes herself, answered customer emails personally, and pitched her brand to anyone who would listen. And slowly, the tide began to turn. One evening, exhausted after a 14-hour day, Danielle scrolled through her phone and saw something that made her heart jolt. An influencer had posted about Soulrise herbal teas, raving about how they helped with stress. Overnight, sales tripled. Within a week, they had quadrupled. Investors began calling. Magazines that once mocked her wanted interviews about her phoenix-like comeback. For the first time in weeks, Danielle smiled, not the forced, brittle smile she had worn since leaving Keith, but a real one. Her brand wasn't just surviving. It was rising. She was rising. But as Danielle's star began to shine, she couldn't ignore the shadows that lingered. Everywhere she went, Keith's name followed her. At networking events, whispers floated, "Isn't she the ex-wife of Keith King?" At meetings, investors asked cautiously, "What happens when Keith retaliates?" The world still saw her as his shadow. And that, Danielle decided, was the next battle she would fight. She wasn't just Keith's wife. She wasn't his victim. She was Danielle King, brave, resilient, unstoppable. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon when she ran into an old acquaintance at a cafe downtown. "Danielle?" The woman's voice was warm with surprise. It was Amelia, an editor at a top lifestyle magazine. Danielle managed a smile. "Amelia. It's been a while." Amelia studied her, her eyes softening. "I read about what happened. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Danielle said firmly. "He may have betrayed me, but he didn't break me." Something in her tone must have struck a chord, because Amelia leaned forward, her eyes bright. "I want to do a feature. Not about the scandal, about you. About Soulrise. About how you're turning pain into power." Danielle's throat tightened. For so long, she had been painted as the cheated wife, the woman left behind. Now, someone wanted to tell her story differently. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, "Yes. Let's do it." The article dropped 2 weeks later, and it changed everything. The headline read, "Danielle King, the woman who rose from betrayal to build an empire." Photos of her, radiant and strong, filled the glossy pages. The article praised her resilience, her business, her vision. Social media lit up with admiration. "She's inspiring. She turned heartbreak into hustle. A queen." For the first time since that night, Danielle felt free. But freedom had its price. Late one evening as she left her office, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The tinted window slid down, and there he was. Her heart stuttered painfully. He looked as polished as ever, his suit tailored, his hair perfectly styled. But his eyes, those blue eyes that once melted her, looked different now. Harder. Tired. "Danielle," he said softly, "can we talk?" She froze, torn between anger and the ache she still carried. For all his betrayal, a part of her heart hadn't stopped beating for him. But she straightened, her voice steady. "I don't owe you anything, Keith." His jaw tightened. "I know. But I owe you." The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the pavement. Danielle stood there, drenched, her pulse racing. She didn't know what Keith wanted. She didn't know if she was ready to face him. But one thing was certain, this was just the beginning of a storm that would test her strength, her heart, and everything she thought she knew about love. The ballroom shimmered with light. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a golden glow, violins played softly in the background, and the city's elite mingled in glittering gowns and tuxedos. The annual Hamilton Charity Gala was the event of the season, a night where fortunes were flaunted under the guise of generosity. And this year, all eyes were waiting for one guest, Danielle King. She hadn't stepped into such a spotlight since leaving Keith, and everyone knew it. Her fall had been public, splashed across tabloids. But her rise, her brand Soulrise, her magazine feature, her growing empire, had been louder. People whispered now, but not with pity. With awe. When Danielle entered the ballroom, The entire room seemed to shift. She wore a floor-length emerald gown that hugged her figure with effortless grace. Her natural curls framed her face like a crown, her skin glowing under the chandeliers. Confidence radiated from her in waves, not the brittle smile of a woman hiding pain, but the unshakable presence of someone who had walked through fire and come out shining. The whispers began instantly. "Is that her? She looks breathtaking. No wonder Keith looks nervous." "Yes." He stood across the room, surrounded by investors and yes-men, his ever-present mistress Victoria clinging to his arm in a crimson dress that screamed for attention. But it was useless. No one was looking at her. Everyone was looking at Danielle. Keith's jaw tightened as his gaze locked with Danielle's across the room. For a moment, time froze. The violins played on, the crowd buzzed, but all he saw was her, his wife, his ex, his greatest regret. Danielle held his stare, her expression unreadable. Then she turned, her smile dazzling as she greeted the mayor's wife, effectively dismissing him. That dismissal cut deeper than any insult. Later in the evening, as Danielle stood near the bar discussing a potential collaboration with a venture capitalist, a familiar voice slid behind her. "You've changed." Her spine stiffened. Slowly she turned. Keith stood there, glass of scotch in hand, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Changed?" she repeated, arching a brow. "No, Keith. I've always been this woman. You just never cared to see her." His lips parted, then pressed into a line. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Danielle, Mr. King," interrupted the venture capitalist, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "We were just discussing Soulrise expansion plans. Quite an impressive trajectory." Keith's jaw flexed. "I'm sure it is." Danielle smiled sweetly. "Yes. In fact, we're finalizing a deal that will place Soulrise products in every Hamilton department store nationwide." Keith froze. Hamilton was one of his largest partners. This wasn't just success for Danielle, it was a direct threat to his empire. The realization hit him like a punch. She wasn't just rising. She was rising against him. As the night went on, the tension between them crackled like electricity. Whenever Danielle entered a circle, conversations turned to her resilience, her brilliance, her brand. Whenever Victoria tried to shine, people's eyes slid past her, uninterested. Danielle wasn't Keith's wife anymore. She was a star in her own right. Victoria noticed it too. Her smile grew tight, her hand clutching Keith's arm harder. At one point she leaned in and hissed, "Why is everyone looking at her? She's nothing without you." But Keith didn't answer. Because deep down he knew the truth. Danielle was everything without him. Near the end of the night, Danielle stepped onto the balcony to catch her breath. The city stretched below, glittering, alive. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, inhaling the cool night air. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Keith said quietly. Danielle let out a soft laugh. "Funny. I've been alone for months now. And I'm doing just fine." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You look incredible." Her chest tightened, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "Flattery won't erase what you did." "I know." He moved to stand beside her, his eyes on the city instead of her. "I was a fool, Danielle. I thought I needed control, power. I didn't realize until it was too late that I needed you." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The man she once loved, still loved, though she wished she didn't, was standing beside her, confessing what she had once prayed to hear. But it was too late. Or was it? She turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "You destroyed us, Keith. You betrayed me. Do you have any idea what it took to pick myself up? To stand here tonight?" His gaze dropped, shame flickering in his eyes. "Yes. And I admire you more than ever for it." Her heart twisted painfully. How cruel that the man who broke her could still make her heart race with a few words. She shook her head. Admiration isn't love. And love without respect is nothing. Suddenly, the balcony door opened, and Victoria's voice cut through the night. "Keith!" Her tone was sweet but dripping with possessiveness. Her eyes darted between them, narrowing at Danielle. Am I interrupting? Danielle smiled coldly. Not at all. I was just leaving. She brushed past them, her head high, her perfume lingering in the air. Keith watched her go, his chest tight with longing and regret. Victoria clutched his arm, her smile triumphant, but he barely noticed. His eyes stayed on Danielle, disappearing into the crowd inside. Because for the first time, Keith understood the power had shifted. Danielle no longer needed him. But he needed her more than ever. Later that night, Danielle lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her emotions warred within her, anger, pain, desire, strength. Seeing Keith again had reopened wounds she thought were healing. But it also reminded her of something vital. She wasn't the broken woman who had walked out of that penthouse months ago. She was stronger now, braver, and standing on her own 2 feet. Keith might try to win her back. The world might still try to tie her name to his. But Danielle King knew the truth. She was no longer living in his shadow. She was building her own empire. And for the first time, she believed she could win. Not just against Keith, but against every voice that ever doubted her. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder. It crept in silently, like betrayal often does. Keith's empire, once unshakable, began to crack from the inside. Investors were pulling out, contracts were collapsing, and the name King Enterprises was suddenly tainted by scandal. The whispers that once mocked Danielle now turned on him. And at the center of it all? Victoria. The same woman he had betrayed Danielle with. The same woman he thought was an accessory to his success. She had been siphoning funds, leaking information to competitors, and playing him for a fool while draping herself in diamonds bought with his money. The discovery hit Keith like a wrecking ball. For a man who had built his empire on control and power, losing it all was more devastating than he could bear. But even more devastating? Knowing that Danielle had warned him once. Warned him that the people he trusted cared more for his money than for him. He hadn't listened then. And now his empire was burning. Danielle read the headlines one crisp morning as she sipped her coffee in her sunlit office. King Enterprises in crisis. Mistress turned traitor. Victoria Lane sued for fraud. She should have felt satisfaction. Justice even. But as her eyes scanned the articles, she didn't smile. Instead, a heavy ache filled her chest. Because once upon a time, she had loved that man with her whole heart. And even now, some stubborn part of her still did. 2 days later, their paths crossed again. This time not at a gala or on a red carpet, but in the quiet, sterile lobby of a law firm. Danielle had been finalizing contracts for Soulrise when she stepped out of the elevator and saw him. Gone was the arrogant, immaculately groomed billionaire. His suit was still tailored, but his shoulders slumped under invisible weight. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now looked tired, bruised by sleepless nights. Danielle, he breathed as though just saying her name might steady him. She froze, her heartbeat stumbling. Keith. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Then, finally, he stepped closer. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything, he said, voice raw, but I don't know where else to turn. Danielle's lips parted, surprise flickering across her face. You're asking me for help? After everything? His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I don't need your money. I need to... Her breath caught. Those words, once her dream, now her torment. I don't think you understand, Keith, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. The woman you betrayed isn't here anymore. The Danielle who waited at home, hoping for your love, is gone. I know, he whispered. His eyes glistened, pain and humility in them for the first time. And that's the woman I regret losing every day. That night, Danielle couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind. She knew better than to trust him. She knew the wounds ran too deep, the scars too fresh. But she also knew her own heart. She wasn't built for vengeance. She was built for strength, compassion, and love. And love? Well, love was complicated. The following week, Danielle walked into a boardroom filled with Soulrise executives. On the agenda, a massive deal with an international distributor, one that would officially position her company as a rival to King Enterprises. As she laid out the strategy, she caught herself hesitating. Not out of fear for Keith, but out of something deeper. Would crushing him truly bring her peace? A sharp-eyed woman named Monique, leaned close and whispered, "You look torn. Don't tell me you're thinking of going easy on him." Danielle straightened, her eyes hardening with resolve. "No. I'm thinking of leading with integrity. That's something Keith never gave me. But I'll give it to him, even if it costs me." 2 days later, she called him. When Keith answered, his voice was low, almost broken. "Danielle? I'm not here to save you," she said immediately. "I'm here because I refuse to become like you. I won't build my success on someone else's destruction, even yours." Silence stretched on the line, heavy with unsaid words. Then, finally, Keith spoke. "You're stronger than I ever deserved." Her chest tightened. "You're right about that." But then, softer, almost against her will, she added, "And maybe stronger than you ever imagined." Weeks passed, and slowly, Keith began to rebuild. Humbled, scarred, but different. He sold off divisions, let go of toxic allies, and began showing up at charity events not for cameras, but for causes. He was changing. And Danielle? She watched from a distance, her heart caught between mistrust and longing. Then came the night of the Soul Rise launch gala. Danielle stood on stage, her emerald gown shimmering under the lights, her voice steady as she thanked her team, her investors, and the community that believed in her. Applause thundered through the hall, cameras flashing like fireworks. And when her eyes drifted to the back of the room, she saw him. He wasn't front and center, wasn't trying to claim her spotlight. He stood quietly, hands clasped, pride and love in his eyes. And for the first time, Danielle didn't see the man who betrayed her. She saw the man trying to be worthy of her. Later, after the gala, she found him waiting outside beneath the city lights. "You came," she said softly. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the night air cool around them. Finally, Keith stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Danielle, I know I may never deserve a second chance. But if you could see me, not the man I was, but the man I'm trying to be, I'd spend every day proving I'll never hurt you again." Her heart ached, torn between reason and desire. She could walk away, safe and whole. Or she could risk it all, knowing love always carried the chance of pain. Slowly, she reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. His breath hitched, his eyes searching hers desperately. "I don't forgive easily," she whispered. "And I'll never forget." "I wouldn't want you to," he murmured. She drew in a shaky breath. "Then prove it. Show me that this time, love isn't weakness. It's strength." Keith's eyes softened, his voice breaking. "With you, Danielle, love is everything." And when his lips finally met hers, tentative, reverent, it wasn't the kiss of a man claiming what was his. It was the kiss of a man grateful for a second chance, and of a woman who had found victory not in revenge, but in reclaiming her power, her dignity, and her heart. Danielle had walked through betrayal. She had risen from ashes. And now, standing in the arms of the man who once broke her, she realized something profound. Her victory was never about him. It was about her. The morning sun spilled through Danielle's office windows, golden light reflecting off the glass awards lining the shelf. Soul Rise had officially gone global. Her products were now in homes across 3 continents, her brand a symbol of resilience and authenticity. She stood by the window, sipping her tea, when arms slid gently around her waist. His lips brushed her temples softly, reverently, as though each touch was a prayer of gratitude. "Do you ever stop amazing me?" he whispered. Danielle smiled, leaning back into his embrace. There were still moments she questioned it, whether letting him back into her life was wisdom or folly. But then he'd say something like that, or look at her with those unguarded eyes, and she'd remember why she had given him another chance. Because this Keith was not the same man who had broken her. This Keith was rebuilding, not just his empire, but himself. Brick by brick. With patience, humility, and love. And she had made sure of one thing. He rebuilt alongside her, not over her. Later that evening, they hosted a fundraiser, together. The press, who once feasted on their downfall, now marveled at their unlikely reconciliation. "Do you think they'll last this time?" whispered one socialite. "They might," another replied. "She's not the same woman, and neither is he." Danielle overheard but didn't flinch. Let them speculate. What mattered wasn't the world's approval, it was the peace in her heart. As the night wound down, Keith took her hand and pulled her onto the balcony, away from the crowd. The city stretched out below them, glittering like their future. "I've lost fortunes," he said softly, "but the greatest loss was almost losing you forever. I'll spend my life proving I'm worthy of this second chance." Danielle studied him, her heart steady. "And I'll spend mine making sure I never lose myself again. That's the only way this works, Keith, me standing tall beside you, not behind you." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Beside me. Always." She smiled, leaning into his kiss, gentle, certain, a promise sealed under the city lights. And so their story, once written in betrayal and heartbreak, was rewritten in resilience, forgiveness, and love. Danielle had turned her pain into power. Keith had turned his arrogance into humility. Together, they had found not perfection, but something stronger. A love rebuilt. A love reborn. A love victorious.